In the spring of 1980, a young man named Robert Shaffern arrived for his freshman year at Sullivan County Community College. It was his first ever day of college. He was very excited. New life, new me. As he stepped out of his car and headed toward the main entrance, a girl suddenly ran up and hugged him, saying, "Oh, Eddie, I'm so glad you could make it." Robert was puzzled by the strange encounter, but things only got weirder. More students greeted him warmly. One guy said, "Wow, Eddie, I didn't expect you here today. Are you joining us for lunch later?" Robert immediately thought it must be some kind of prank. He looked around for hidden cameras, expecting someone to pop out and say it was all a joke. But no one did. He began explaining to the other students that there had been a mistake. His name was Robert, and he had never set foot on this campus before. That's when a student named Mike looked him in the eyes and said, "Get in the car. You're not going to believe what I'm about to show you." They drove for about 30 minutes, until they stopped in front of a suburban house. When they knocked on the door, Robert came face to face with someone who looked exactly like him, his identical twin. Somehow, Robert and this young man, whose name was Eddie, had been separated at birth and adopted by different families. They quickly bonded and even became local celebrities. Their incredible story was soon picked up by a New York newspaper, and that's when a third man named David saw their photos. Astonishingly, he too looked exactly like Robert and Eddie. It turned out they were triplets, all separated at birth and placed into different homes, one into a working-class family, one into a middle-class household, and one into a wealthy, upper-class home. This wasn't a coincidence. Behind it all was a disturbing and secretive study, orchestrated by a man named Peter Neubauer. Peter B. Neubauer wanted to settle the nature versus nurture debate once and for all. He partnered with Anna Freud, the daughter of Sigmund Freud. Both had fled Austria due to their Jewish heritage. Neubauer conducted a secret study in which he deliberately separated identical twins at birth. One child would be placed in a low-income household, while the other was sent to a wealthy family. He believed this would be a groundbreaking experiment, one that would finally prove we are nothing more than blank slates shaped entirely by our environment. But the results revealed the opposite. When the separated siblings eventually reunited, it became clear that they had lived strikingly similar lives despite being raised in completely different settings. Today, such an experiment would be considered deeply unethical. But the data Neubauer collected remains incredibly valuable, even if it contradicted his original assumptions. Instead of publishing his findings, Neubauer handed over all records to the Jewish Board of Family and Children's Services. The organization sealed the files, deciding they should remain confidential until October 2066. Why are the donors of the study so afraid of the findings? In this video, I'm going to show you exactly how the study backfired. Although the full results have never been published, many twins who unknowingly participated in the experiment later came forward voluntarily. These twins have since been studied by independent researchers, and what they discovered is astonishing. Keep in mind, in all these cases, the twins had no idea the other existed until they were contacted by researchers. They agreed to meet up of their own free will. Let's start with the triplets from the story at the beginning.
If you are like me, you are probably fascinated by identical twins, but there's nobody more obsessed with identical twins and triplets than scientists to answer an age-old debate. That is the debate of nature versus nurture. Is it our upbringing and our choices that make us who we are, or is it our biology? Identical twins and triplets separated at birth have answered the debate. It is fascinating and very dark. First of all, identical twins are not always identical. On average, there are 5.2 genetic mutations different between each twin. There's a movie called Three Identical Strangers, and if you haven't seen it, you should, about three identical triplets that were separated at birth. They all find each other at 19 in New York, and it's a feel-good story, and the media loves it, and they have all these amazing similarities. They had the same favorite color. They all wanted to be actors. They all wrestled in high school, and they smoked the same kind of cigarette. The only difference was how they were raised. One was in a blue-collar family, one was in a middle-class family, and one was in an upper-class family. This was not a coincidence. This was an experiment masterminded by this man, Peter B. Neubauer. It's an incredible movie. It's kind of dark, but I highly recommend you watch it because it answers the question, nature versus nurture.
They look nearly identical, and incredibly, two of them ended up at the same college, studying the same subjects, despite one being raised in a poor household and the other in a middle-class home. The similarities are undeniable. Just look at their faces. We know for a fact they were raised in completely different environments. Dr. Neubauer deliberately tried to maximize the differences in upbringing. Yet there is zero difference in their looks or attractiveness. If I hadn't told you they were triplets, you might have thought it was just one person in different outfits. Here's another case. When two twin sisters met for the first time, both were wearing 7 rings, 3 bracelets, and a watch. They didn't talk before. There was no way for them to know how the other person would look like, let alone dress. Sure, it might sound like coincidence. But these things start to add up. Twins have been found to share the same IQ, same handwriting, same hairstyles. They hold cups the same way. They give their pets the same names. It all points to one thing: identical brains make identical decisions. It's genetic. Of course, environment still matters. Maybe your neighbor is selling his old Mercedes, and that's why you drive one, while your identical twin, raised somewhere else, ended up with a BMW. So yes, environment plays a role. But in many cases, we can clearly observe how deeply hardwired our preferences are. Like how many rings you wear. There's no rule, no social pressure, it's entirely based on individual taste. And that taste seems to be genetic.
Separated at birth, these twins lived eerily identical lives without ever knowing. After being adopted by separate families, the two twins were both named James and called Jim for short. They both had childhood dogs named Toy and were amazing at math and woodworking, but sucked at spelling. Later in life, both Jims married a woman named Linda, and after a divorce, remarried a woman named Betty. Each of them had a son named James Allen and would take trips to Florida at the same beach. The twins were both heavy smokers, worked in security, and drove the exact same car. After 37 years of living strangely similar lives, the two found out about one another and agreed to meet. After taking part in a study that showed that their brainwaves were nearly identical, the twins would be the subject of nature versus nurture debates for years to come.
No, there's not one gene for naming your dog Max or for liking bracelets. But if two people have the same brain architecture, the same things seem to appeal to them in the same way. Those two twins are especially fascinating. When they met, they were both working as firefighters, both bald, wearing belts, and both the same height, 6 feet 4 inches. Even more striking, they both held their beer in exactly the same, very specific way. But there was one noticeable difference: one of them was a bit heavier. That difference could very likely be explained by their diet. Maybe one of them developed the habit of grabbing a McDonald's meal during lunch breaks, while the other usually ate at a local cafeteria. That slight difference in daily calorie intake can easily lead to a visible weight difference over time. Another example. In Colombia, 2 pairs of identical twins were accidentally swapped at birth by a hospital. One pair grew up in a very poor area, without electricity. And yet, despite these radically different conditions, the similarities between the twins are striking. Their voices, handwriting, and IQ were also found to be identical. There is also a Netflix documentary about this amazing story. The kind of things I talk about on this channel, the evidence I present in videos like this one, it's not ignored by accident. It's systematically censored at the highest levels. But that taboo is already starting to crack. Maybe the truth won't be fully accepted during my lifetime, but the genie is out of the bottle. But here's the real question: why the cover-up? Why go through all the effort of creating a massive, secretive project, one involving adoption agencies, psychologists, and wealthy donors? What was really going on? To understand why we're forced to live in a fake world, we need to look at the historical context. In the early 20th century, more and more radical thinkers began publishing books that were essentially social dynamite. One of them was The Passing of the Great Race by Madison Grant. In that book, Grant argued that there were biological differences between what he classified as human races. He claimed that black people, Arabs, and even Jewish people would never fully assimilate into Western societies. According to him, differences in intelligence, behavior, and group preferences would inevitably lead to conflict, and ultimately, the destruction of his own people. A young Adolf Hitler read that book, and he subscribed to Grant's ideas wholeheartedly. Hitler became convinced, almost fanatically, that biology would determine the fate of his people. This race-based, biological worldview was the complete opposite of what the communists believed. Not only did they reject the idea of racial differences, they denied Mendelian genetics altogether. They insisted that all human behavior and social outcomes could be explained by environment and economics alone. This became one of the key ideological divisions that would ultimately fuel the Second World War. After Germany was defeated, communist regimes across Eastern Europe banned all copies of Madison Grant's book. In fact, talking openly about genetics became illegal. All differences between groups were now attributed solely to social or economic factors. It was during this post-war period that Anna Freud and other psychoanalysts gained enormous influence over Western academia. They were able to blame everything on social conditions, while also gaining the power to silence or punish anyone who challenged their views. This mindset paved the way for their infamous experiment. They believed they had defeated all resistance, and could now reshape every institution according to their ideology. In the Soviet Union, this was easy. But similar ideological shifts occurred in the West as well. Hollywood and academia gradually came under the control of individuals with Marxist leanings. Even many Christians had little motivation to speak out, as the topic of genetics was too closely tied to evolution, which they already opposed on religious grounds. So we ended up in a world where the Marxists won the war. Marxists control academia. And anyone who dares to talk about genetics is instantly labeled a Nazi, which of course, is equated with being evil. However, now that we have the internet, there's simply no way for the communist lie to hold up forever. The importance of genetics is becoming more obvious with each passing day. Anyone watching black pill content already has one foot outside the old boomer truth regime. People working in education are beginning to notice clear genetic differences. And with the rise of genome-wide association studies, the old communist excuses are becoming impossible to maintain. There's still a long road ahead before this knowledge becomes widely accepted, but the truth will come out. Eventually, it can't be stopped. We are now living in an era where, for the first time, average people are beginning to wake up. DBDR is a perfect example. He's a completely ordinary-looking guy. You probably wouldn't notice or remember him if he passed you on the street. He looks like your typical lower-end low-tier normie. And yet, he possesses a striking level of awareness that many of us share. He openly acknowledges that certain physical and psychological traits are completely outside of our control. The success of his channel shows that these ideas resonate with a growing number of people, and that number is only going to rise. We're on the verge of seeing an entire generation of young men become hyper-aware of the lies sold to them by the boomer generation. No one can say for certain where this awareness will lead. There are still so many conversations we haven't had. So many implications we haven't even begun to process. If you accept that genetics play a major role in shaping your life, and I trust most of my subscribers are intelligent enough to understand this, then the real question becomes, how do you cope? How do you process the sight of someone with a severe genetic defect, condemned to a vegetative existence? How do you make peace with the fact that some Chad on Instagram is living his dream life, while you're stuck in a slum in India with no realistic hope of ever catching up? Either economically or physically? Beyond height, looks, and intelligence, there's another trait that is almost entirely genetic: the capacity for religious belief. If you look at history, all its injustices, wars, and suffering, it becomes clear why faith might have been selected for. Life can become unbearable without something to lean on, and for many people, that something is belief in a higher power. In this community, most discussions tend to revolve around dating, understandably, since most of us are young and biologically driven, but there are fates far worse than being a single man. One day, you will receive a phone call, and it will change your life forever. It might be the moment you learn that your mother has passed away. It might be a doctor telling you that you have cancer. Or it might be the day your employer informs you that you've been replaced, without warning, without a second thought. As I record this video, somewhere, not far from where you live, there is an elderly woman lying dead in her bed. She has been there for days. Her dog, still alive, hasn't been fed. No one has noticed. No one has come to check on her. And that's just one of countless silent tragedies playing out around us every single day. Life is full of suffering, and we might be the first generation that fully grasps the depth and scale of it. There's no more comfort in empty phrases like "just keep your head up" or "everything happens for a reason." That kind of naive optimism doesn't hold up anymore. People are starting to understand that most things in life, our appearance, our health, our intelligence, our opportunities, are completely outside of our control. Hardship isn't always something you can overcome with willpower. And most of the pain we go through doesn't make us stronger. It doesn't teach us anything. It's just senseless suffering. We've been raised to believe in fairness, in effort, in justice, that if we do everything right, things will turn out okay. But reality doesn't work like that. Sometimes, no matter how hard you try, life will hit you with something cruel, something irreversible. And there's nothing you can do about it. Coming to terms with this truth is like being ripped out of a dream. But maybe, just maybe, there's a kind of liberation in seeing things clearly for the first time. Because once you stop believing the comforting lies, you can finally start asking the questions that actually matter.